No child should stay in the womb for 900 days. No mother should endure such a burden. But Angela did. When the pain began, the village gathered. They expected a birth, a cry, an end to the waiting. Instead, what came that night was only the beginning. One child entered the world. But Angela's belly remained round, as if untouched by labor. The next day, another came. Then another. Each birth brought whispers. Each child was unlike the last. Some said they were gifts. Others said they were warnings. And then, the truth began to reveal itself. This story is unlike anything you've heard. Stay till the end to uncover the terrifying secret behind Angela's children. And if you love African folktales, like, subscribe to our channel. Angela was a woman of strength, a woman of patience. She had waited for the moment she would bring life into the world, but time had become her enemy. Days stretched into months. Months unraveled into years. And still, her womb remained full. At first, there was joy. The women of the village clapped their hands and placed their palms against her growing belly, offering blessings. They said the child within her must be special, a rare gift from the gods. But as seasons passed and her body did not change, their joy turned to worry. Then to fear. 9 moons came and went. Then 10. Then 20. And still, Angela carried the child. The whispers began, soft at first, creeping through the village like smoke. No woman carries for so long. This is not the work of the gods. Something is wrong with her belly. Her husband tried to silence them, standing by her side. He reassured her that the child was simply taking its time, that all would be well. But doubt crept into his voice, no matter how much he tried to push it away. Even in the quiet of the night, Angela could hear his restless turning, the way he stared at the fire instead of sleeping. The village elders were called to meet beneath the great tree. They sat in a circle, their faces carved with the weight of knowledge. After much debate, they made a decision. The oracle must be consulted. Only the spirits could explain what no human could. Angela was brought before the sacred shrine, her hands trembling as she knelt on the cool earth. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs. The oracle, a woman whose years could not be counted, stepped forward. Her blind eyes bore into Angela's soul, seeing what no other could. She spoke, and the ground beneath them seemed to still. Your womb is no longer yours. It belongs to the unseen. Your children are not like others. Their fates are tied to the spirits of the forest. A hush fell over the gathering. The words could not be undone. They would settle into the bones of the people, shape their thoughts, twist their beliefs. From that day forward, Angela was no longer just a mother-to-be. She was something else entirely. Something that should not be. The night the pain began, the sky was not as it should have been. The moon hung heavy, swollen, its color deep like blood. The wind whispered through the trees, and the air smelled of something old, something forgotten. Angela's cries tore through the stillness, sending a shudder through the village. The women came running, midwives hurrying to her side. Their hands worked with skill, their voices steady, but behind their calm faces lay unease. They had never helped a woman who had carried a child for so long. They did not know what to expect. The birth was not easy. Angela's body resisted, held tight to what it had carried for so long. The women whispered prayers, calling on the ancestors to guide the child safely into the world. And then, at last, with a final, wrenching cry, the child was born. For a moment, there was silence. No one moved. No one breathed. The infant lay in the midwife's hands, sleek with the journey from the womb, its chest rising and falling as it took its first breath. A child, whole and perfect, yet something about him made the woman uneasy. Then, someone gasped. Eyes widened. Hands trembled. The midwife took a step back, her lips parting as if to speak but finding no words. The child's eyes were open. Wide. A newborn should not stare so boldly, should not hold a gaze that seemed too knowing, too deep. But it was not just the stare that unsettled them. His eyes did not reflect the light. They carried it. In the darkness of the hut, they glowed, a faint and steady shimmer, like embers hidden beneath ash. Fear settled over the room. No one wanted to speak the first word, to be the one to name what they all felt creeping into their bones. Then, Angela shifted, reaching weakly for the child, her mother's heart stronger than the fear in the room. But as she moved, a new wave of whispers rippled through the gathered women. The oldest midwife, her face carved with years of wisdom, took a hesitant step forward. Her voice, when it came, was tight with disbelief. Her belly. Angela's stomach, round and full, had not changed. The birth should have emptied it, should have left her body loose and exhausted. Instead, it remained as before, as if no child had been taken from it at all. The younger midwives took hurried steps backward, crossing their arms over their chest. This was not the way of women. A womb does not hold after birth. A mother does not bring forth and still remain as she was. The child in Angela's arms let out a small, sharp sound, not a cry, not quite laughter, but something between the two. A sound that raised the hairs on the skin of all who heard it. That night, the first of Angela's children entered the world. But it was clear to all who witnessed it, this was no ordinary birth, and what was yet to come would not be ordinary either. Days passed, but Angela's womb did not shrink. The whispers in the village deepened into murmurs of fear. Some women refused to step into her home. The midwives spoke in hushed tones, their hands shaking when they thought no one was watching. And then, on the night of the storm, it happened again. Thunder roared across the sky, splitting the darkness with a force that shook the earth. Rain fell in heavy sheets, drumming against rooftops, filling the air with the scent of damp earth and something else, something electric. Angela's cries rose above the wind, her body once again gripped by pain. The women of the village hesitated, unwilling to bear witness to what they did not understand. Only the eldest midwife, her heart heavier than her steps, went to her side. As the child emerged, the sky answered. A bolt of lightning struck the great tree at the edge of the village, splitting it in two. The newborn's first breath came as the thunder cracked, and for the briefest moment, the air shimmered around him. He did not cry. He did not tremble. His tiny fist curled as if he had caught the storm itself and held it within him. The village did not sleep that night. No one spoke of what they had seen. But every face carried the same thought, this was not the last. Days turned into nights, and the people held their breath. Then, when the air was thick with waiting, the pain found Angela again. This time, the night was still. No wind stirred the trees, no rustling came from the underbrush. The insects that hummed in the grasses fell silent. Even the dogs, who howled at the moon each night, lowered their heads and refused to make a sound. As the third child was born, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. And as soon as he entered the world, the hush deepened. No sound escaped his lips. His chest rose and fell, his eyes blinked open, but he did not make a sound. Angela wept, her body trembling, her mind unraveling. But the children were not done with her. The fourth birth came in the heat of midday, when the sun stood high and unyielding. The villagers, weary of witnessing what should not be, turned away. But those who remained gasped in horror. The child's skin was wrung, too cold beneath their hands, colder than any living thing should be. The heat of the sun did not touch him. The warmth of his mother's embrace did not stir him. He opened his eyes, dark as a night with no stars, and the air around him seemed to cool. By the time the fifth child came, the village no longer questioned. They only waited, afraid of what more could be given. This time, when Angela cried out, there were no prayers. No hands reached to comfort her. The fire in her home flickered low, casting long shadows against the walls. The child's arrival was swift, as if he had already known the way. He took his first breath, and then, to the horror of all who heard, he spoke. "Mother, why am I here?" The words crawled into the bones of those present, settled into the space where fear had already made a home. A newborn should not speak. A child so young should not question its own existence. Angela's husband, who had remained silent through it all, turned away, his hands gripping his head, his breath uneven. His heart told him to run, but where does one go when the impossible lives within their own walls? The elders gathered, their voices heavy with concern. The oracle had warned them, yet they had not truly understood. They searched their scrolls, dug into the knowledge passed down through generations. But there was nothing. No story, no record of such a thing ever happening before. What had they welcomed into their village? Then, on the final night, when the moon should have glowed bright in the sky, the darkness deepened instead. The stars, countless and eternal, disappeared one by one until nothing remained but an emptiness so vast it swallowed all light. And as that darkness settled over the land, Angela's body gave in one last time. The sixth child was born into a world that had turned its back on the light. And in the silence, in the waiting, something shifted in the balance of things. A change had come, one that could not be undone. The village did not forget. Time passed, but fear is not softened by the turning of seasons. It lingers, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for proof that it was right all along. And that proof came soon enough. The firstborn, the child of the glowing eyes, did not run like the others. He did not play where the sun touched the ground. Instead, he stood at the edges of light, where shadows stretched long and deep. And when he moved, the darkness moved with him. His own shadow did not follow the sun's path but bent, twisted, reached for things unseen. Sometimes, it stretched to places it should not have been, curling around the feet of others, wrapping around their bodies like fingers of something waiting beneath the earth. And sometimes, when the night was long, the villagers swore they saw more than one shadow following behind him. The second child carried the storm in his veins. The air crackled when he walked past, the hairs on the arms of those nearby rising as if the sky itself recognized him. When he grew angry, the clouds above thickened. When he laughed, sparks danced at his fingertips. And one day, when another boy tried to strike him in play, the sky answered before he could. A streak of lightning split the air, touching the ground near their feet. The other child ran screaming, and the village never looked at Angela's son the same way again. The third was quiet, too quiet. He did not laugh like children should. He did not cry when he was hurt. But sometimes, when he sat alone beneath the great tree, his lips moved, whispering words to no one. And yet, he was not speaking to the wind. For when he listened, his head tilted, as if he was answering someone just out of sight. The village dogs, once playful, whimpered and lowered their heads when he passed, tails tucked, ears flattened. And in the darkest hours, those who dared listen closely could hear voices answering back. The fourth child was different from all the rest. His touch was wrong. It was too cold, too unnatural. The heat of the sun never warmed his skin. The warmth of fire never seemed to reach him. And where he placed his hands, the air itself seemed to stiffen. Once, when his mother left water in a clay pot, he brushed his fingers over the rim. When she reached for it moments later, the water had hardened, turned to ice that had no place under the burning African sky. The elders watched him after that, their eyes filled with things they would not say. The fifth child's voice was soft, yet when he spoke, those who heard him felt as though he had reached inside them. He did not ask questions the way other children did. Instead, he spoke truths that had not been given to him. A man walked past, and the child turned to him, whispering words that made the man's face go pale. Another time, a woman fell to her knees, wailing, begging him to stop. He saw things that had been hidden, things that no child should know. And so the people began to fear him most of all. The sixth child was there one moment and gone the next. It was not that he ran. It was not that he hid. He would simply be standing before them, and then, in the blink of an eye, he was no longer there. They searched, calling his name, but he did not answer. Then suddenly, he would be behind them, watching, as if he had never left. It became harder to know where he truly was. Harder to trust their own eyes. Harder to believe that the child was ever really human at all. By then, the whispers in the village had turned to certainty. These were not children of man. These were not gifts from the gods. These were something else, something born of things they did not speak of, things that lived between the seen and the unseen. And if they were not children of this world, then they did not belong in it. The elders gathered once more beneath the great tree, their voices weighed with the decision that had been coming since the first cry left Angela's lips. The answer was clear. There was no room for the spirit's children in a village of men. And so, they called for what must be done. Angela's heart was heavy, burdened beyond what any mother should bear. The whispers of the village had become words, and the words had become decisions. She had carried them within her for what felt like eternity, had given them life through pain and sacrifice. And now, the very people she had once called her own wanted them gone. Wanted them undone. She could not accept it. She would not. And so, with the weight of a mother's desperation, she walked into the forest, where the living do not tread after dark. Alone, she stepped beneath the towering trees, into the place where roots ran deep and the air was thick with things unseen. The sacred forest. The place where spirits did not rest, where voices did not echo, because the land itself swallowed all sound. She fell to her knees, her hands pressing into the damp earth. Her breath was unsteady, her chest rising and falling with the weight of the unspoken question that burned within her. Why? Why had she been chosen for this burden? Why had her body been made into a door for things the world did not understand? Why were her children not like other children? What had she done to bring such a fate upon them? The wind shifted. The air thickened. The trees, which had stood silent for centuries, seemed to lean in. Then, from the depths of the unseen, the voices came. You ask why? They did not speak in words, not in the way men do. The voices came from everywhere and nowhere, from the rustling of leaves, from the breath of the wind, from the pulse of the earth beneath her fingers. Your womb was chosen. Angela trembled, her body weak from all she had endured, but she did not look away. Balance and chaos, they continued. For when the world tips too far in one direction, something must rise to correct it. 6 will walk the earth, but only one will decide the fate of men. The weight of the words pressed into her chest. She did not fully understand them, but she felt their truth settle into her bones. Her children were not accidents. They were not curses. They were pieces of something greater. And yet, in their existence lay a terrible choice. One among them would bring salvation. One would bring ruin. And the world would not know which until the moment came. The forest fell silent again. The presence of the spirits faded like mist beneath the morning sun. Angela remained kneeling, her hands curled into fist against the earth. The answer had been given, but it was not the one she had hoped for. There was no escape from what had been set in motion. There was no undoing what had already begun. When she returned to the village, her steps were slow, heavy with the burden of knowledge. The people had gathered, their fear now something solid, something alive. The elders stood before them, their faces grim. The firelight danced against their skin, making their eyes seem hollow, their features carved from stone. They had made their decision. The village would not wait for fate to reveal itself. They would not risk destruction for the hope of salvation. The prophecy had spoken of one who would bring ruin, and to them, it did not matter which. If one would bring disaster, then none could be spared. The children must not remain. The village had spoken. The elders, once the guardians of wisdom, had become the bearers of judgment. There would be no waiting for fate to show its hand. No gamble taken on which child would bring ruin and which would bring salvation. To them, it was simpler. If destruction lay among them, then none could be spared. The fire in the center of the village burned high, casting long shadows across the gathered crowd. The mothers clutched their children close, shielding their faces as if the sight alone would tame them. The warriors stood ready, their hands gripping weapons meant for battle, yet now turned toward something far worse. Toward a decision no blade could cleanse. The children of Angela were to be removed, erased before their fate could take root. But fate does not wait for the will of men. Before the first step could be taken, the wind shifted. A coldness crept into the air, unnatural, sharp, and biting. The sky, once painted with the deep hues of evening, darkened further, swallowing the moon and the stars. The elders looked up, their voices faltering. The people huddled closer. Even the fire, strong and steady moments before, flickered uncertainly, shrinking as if it, too, feared what was coming. And then, laughter. Soft at first, drifting through the air like the whisper of leaves. It called around them, snaking into their ears, filling the spaces between their breaths. It was not the laughter of a child, not the sound of innocence. It was something older, something knowing. Something that had been waiting. The 6th child was gone. He had been there, standing among his siblings, his gaze unreadable. But now, he was nowhere and everywhere. The villagers turned wildly, their eyes darting to the edges of the darkness. Some swore they saw movement, glimpses of a shape that flickered in and out of sight. Others felt the air shift beside them, a presence brushing against their skin before vanishing once more. The ground trembled beneath their feet. The great tree at the heart of the village, the sacred tree, the one that had stood for generations, its roots entwined with their very history, shook violently. The earth cracked around it, deep lines splitting the ground like veins of something awakening. And then, without warning, it ignited. Flames erupted from its core, climbing its branches as if drawn to the heavens. The fire roared, not with the warmth of a natural blaze, but with the fury of something long contained, something that had finally been set free. The people screamed, scattering in terror, their cries swallowed by the howling wind. The elders stood frozen, their wisdom meaningless in the face of forces beyond them. Angela clutched her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had begged for answers, and now she had them. But they were not the answers she had hoped for. The prophecy had begun. Somewhere in the chaos, the children remained silent. watching, waiting. They had been cast as the villains of this story before their fates had been written. But now, the choice was no longer in the hands of the village. The path had been set in motion, and only time would reveal the truth. 6 had been born. 1 would bring ruin. 1 would bring salvation. And now, the world would wait to see which would rise first. What do you think happened next? Comment your thoughts below.